Hello and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Paras.
And Anton, we're here today to talk about another entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Ant-Man.
That's funny enough. That is my nickname.
Really?
No.
Okay. It could have been.
It could have been. I'm sure maybe to someone they say, "Hey, I wonder how Ant-Man's doing."
Right. I was going to say, I've known you for several years now, and it's never come up, so.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not among my nicknames.
Yeah. Well, I think the season before this, we almost didn't cover anything from the MCU, and then Captain America Winter Soldier was a last-minute addition, and this was noted to me by a listener. So this season we are covering 2 films in the MCU. Our season premiere was, of course, Avengers Age of Ultron, and this will come a couple months later.
Yeah, and this is a middle of the 2010s Marvel film. It features everyone's favorite clueless older brother, Paul Rudd.
It does. Coincidentally enough, this is also the 10-year anniversary of this film, as it was for Ultron. Time's flying.
Time is flying. But time is a different construct when you're shrunk by Pym particles.
Right, which this film does a pretty clever way of teasing it for us about what would happen in films to come. I assume they knew they were going to go in this direction when they teased this at the end of this film, right?
Yeah, why else would you give a very, very obscure Marvel hero his own film?
Obscure is the right word for somebody like me. I went into this film with absolutely no knowledge of who Ant-Man was, other than I knew the name and nothing else, which was more or less a first for me. Even when I saw Winter Soldier, I didn't know anything about the Winter Soldier, but of course I knew a decent bit about Captain America, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Ant-Man, though, bro is a founding Avenger in the comics.
Didn't know that.
Yep, Thor, Iron Man, Ant-Man, technically the Hulk.
Scott Lang or Hank Pym?
Hank Pym.
Okay. Is Scott Lang from the comics, or is it something they made up?
Scott Lang is from the comics.
Okay.
And so that's a really fun way to weave in the comic book storyline a bit more, to have Scott Lang instead of Hank Pym.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear your opinion on that, because I know some Marvel purists weren't happy with this direction, but
Well, to them I say, move out of your mom's house.
what are you gonna do? You can't make everybody happy. There's always gonna be something. Like, I thought the first Avengers movie had like a universal approval rating, and years later I found out, like, well, actually we had problems. Some people had problems with it.
Everyone's gonna have problems with it. We're in comic book territory.
Right. So Ant-Man, forced out of his own company by former protege Darren Cross, Dr. Hank Pym recruits the talents of Scott Lang, a master thief just released from prison. Lang becomes Ant-Man, trained by Pym and armed with a suit that allows him to shrink in size, possess superhuman strength, and control an army of ants. The miniature hero must use his new skills to prevent Cross, also known as Yellow Jacket, from perfecting the same technology and using it as a weapon for evil. Ant-Man was released on July 17th, 2015 by Marvel Studios, directed by Peyton Reed, screenplay by Edgar Wright, Joe Cornish, Adam McKay, and Paul Rudd, based on Ant-Man, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, starring Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, Corey Stoll, Michael Douglas, Judy Greer, Abby Ryder Fortson, Bobby Cannavale, Michael Pena, T.I., and Wood Harris. The budget was $130 million. That's $173 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $519 million. That is $691 million adjusted for inflation. Ant-Man is the 12th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it is the final entry in what is known as Phase 2, which began with Iron Man 3 2 years prior to this. Ant-Man. Anton, what do you think?
Oh, Ant-Man. Oh, Ant-Man. As a longtime comic book fan, it's interesting when you look at the films and you say, are they going to go there? Where are you actually going to see different storylines that comic book fans love? Are we going to see characters that we love? Are we going to see comic accurate costumes? And this is one of those cases where, even as a very long time Marvel comic book fan, along with a lot of other fans, it was a question of, we know who the Avengers comprised of for the founding team for the MCU, but we did wonder, when are we going to see some of these other characters that are really important to the comic books? And in walks in the Ant-Man. Now, you said it earlier, very obscure character. I think for the very pedestrian Marvel fan, anyone, just your average fan on the street, does not really know who Ant-Man is or knew who Ant-Man was.
No.
But I mentioned it before. He was a founding Avenger along with Thor, Captain America, or sorry, no, not Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, Ant-Man, and the Wasp. So I don't want to leave her out. But in terms of the importance in the MCU, just very pivotal. A lot of fans may not know it was actually Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, that created even the Ultron character in the comic book storyline. So there was a really big question of, how are we going to have this Ant-Man character introduced? Now, we have Paul Rudd as our Ant-Man, so we knew that was going to be a very hilarious film. And as a fan of this, as a fan of the MCU, as a fan of Marvel, I was really looking forward to it, and I had a good time in theaters. What about you, Pat? Why are you interested in talking about Ant-Man today?
Well, when it was first announced that it was going to come out, I was intrigued because of the then involvement of Edgar Wright. I thought that was pretty cool, because he is a pretty unique, interesting filmmaker. And of course, we all know that didn't end up happening, which we'll talk about in the production history of this film. I didn't see this in theaters. I wanted to, but I missed it. So I saw it when it hit streaming. I think Marvel at this point knew that this was going to be a bigger challenge than some of their other projects, just for the simple fact of what we had touched on. He may be a founding member of the Avengers, but yeah, he is a more obscure character, Ant-Man. It's like the B-level talent, for someone like me. Obviously not for you and, the rest of the Marvel fans. But yeah, for someone like me, I knew Iron Man, I knew Captain America, I knew the Hulk, I even knew Thor, but didn't know anything about Ant-Man. So they knew, Marvel Studios did, of course, that they were going to have to do something a little bit different in order to sell this to the average moviegoer, right? And I think they did that for the most part, which we can discuss in, further detail as we get into it. I definitely was interested by the Paul Rudd thing. That's not a very conventional choice for what you'd imagine in a superhero film, but the trailer looked good. So when I first saw this, it was probably the first Marvel movie that I saw where I just didn't have a lot of context behind it, other than something like I mentioned, the Winter Soldier, right? I didn't know what the Winter Soldier was, but I had a pretty good idea of what to expect by the second Captain America film by this point. But with this, I didn't. So I went into this, you might say, blind. It comes out in the summer of 2015. It made good money. Not as much as some of the other Marvel stuff at the time, but it did really well with critics, too. It has an 83% Rotten Tomatoes score, which is probably the best you could hope for this kind of film, right?
Yeah, that's impressive. Impressive for an under-the-radar MCU character getting their own film.
Yeah. And I know this movie has its fans. There are some that feel it's like one of the filler entries of the MCU, though. Kind of like something like Thor: The Dark World, although I think it's better than that, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, and I think that over time the series and Marvel has been very aware about that. It even pokes fun at itself with a third film, which I have a lot to say about the third film, but we're talking about the first Ant-Man here, so we'll just leave it there.
You hate that third film, don't you?
Oh, it is bad.
Does anyone like it? I've never heard a good thing about it.
I've never heard anyone say anything good about it, or anyone say that it's a film that they like.
Why don't you start the production history for this?
Of course. So, ideas for an Ant-Man movie date back to the late 1980s. Stan Lee pitched the idea to several studios, and Disney showed the most interest, but since they were developing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids at the time, they felt it was too similar and passed on it. At one point, around the turn of the millennium, Howard Stern attempted to purchase the rights from Marvel. In 2003, Edgar Wright and Joe Commish wrote a treatment for Artisan Entertainment. Wright had always loved the character and said his take featured Scott Lang as a burglar, quote, so he could have gone slightly in the Elmore Leonard route, end quote. Though Artisan wanted the film to be more, quote, like a film thing, end quote. Now, however, Wright believed that the treatment was never sent to Marvel. After Lionsgate acquired Artisan later that year, the film rights reverted back to Marvel, but Wright and Commish remained committed to making the film and pitched their idea to Kevin Feige. And in April 2006, Marvel officially hired Wright to direct and co-write Ant-Man with Commish as part of what would become known as Phase Cornish. I'm just reading.
The
Commish. At the 2006 Comic-Con, Wright emphasized that the film would not be a spoof, but rather an action-adventure with some comedic elements and would incorporate both the Hank Pym and Scott Lang incarnations of the character. Around the time that the very first MCU film, Iron Man, was being released, Wright announced that he had finished the first draft of the screenplay. At the 2010 Comic-Con, he revealed that the film would not be released until after the first Avengers film in 2012, but that Ant-Man may appear in future Avengers films. The film would have likely been made sooner, but Wright's friend and partner in his production company, Eric Fellner, was diagnosed with cancer. Wright told the Marvel executives that he was obligated to make The World's End first, out of loyalty to his friend. This was a film that they had been developing for years. Feige and the others were very understanding and accommodating, and it was filmed in late 2012 and released in 2013. By early 2013, Kevin Feige stated that the film would be part of Phase 3. Joss Whedon then later revealed that Hank Pym would not be the creator of Ultron. Pre-production commenced later in 2013. Simon Pegg and Armie Hammer were in the running to play Scott Lang. Eventually, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Paul Rudd became the frontrunners. Rudd, who was Wright's preferred choice, was officially cast in December of that year. Additional casting continued in early 2014, notably Michael Douglas as Hank Pym and Patrick Wilson as Darren Cross. Wright and Cornish continued to work on the script, incorporating the studio's feedback to their edits. To their dismay, the suggestions kept mounting. They were getting notes from Feige, Joss Whedon, and the creative committee separately. The shock arrived in May 2014 when Marvel and Wright announced that he was leaving the project due to, quote, differences in their vision of the film, end quote. Wright said, I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie. He later revealed that his primary reason for leaving was that Marvel had rewritten his screenplay without consulting him, which included numerous changes that he wasn't a fan of.
So the majority of Wright's crew also left the project. Patrick Wilson developed a scheduling conflict and he was replaced by Corey Stoll. Adam McKay was then asked to direct, but he decided against it out of respect for Wright. He did, however, agree to rewrite the screenplay alongside Paul Rudd. Quick sidebar on that. That worked out for McKay because he ended up making and releasing The Big Short in the same year as this. So I wonder if he had directed this, would it have somehow delayed The Big Short? And that's not a world that I want to live in because The Big Short is, I think, one of the best movies from that decade.
I wish that we lived in a timeline where, I don't know, maybe that movie could have been released even earlier. Know what I mean? Because then it's fresh in the minds of all the people that screwed America.
You mean like Margin Call?
Yeah.
Which bombed at the time, unfortunately. Yeah. Also a fantastic movie.
It did bomb, though.
It did. Means we might cover it. It's qualifies for the pod. Yeah, I don't know. McKay directing this is interesting to think about.
McKay would have to really lean into fight choreography, right?
Yeah.
Which not really a thing of his films.
No, I don't know if it's a Peyton Reed thing either. Speaking of Peyton Reed, he ended up directing this. He was hired shortly after this. Because the film was locked into a July 2015 release date, he had a little more than a year to deliver this, which I think is something of note that we should take into consideration when reviewing this. Bringing someone in, giving them only a year to handle this kind of film is asking a lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Rudd and Adam McKay, they reworked the script over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. All four individuals, those two, Edgar Wright and Cornish, were given official writing credits. Wright also retained an executive producer credit. Director Peyton Reed said the costume design was influenced by Asian tokusatsu superheroes such as Ultraman and Inframan. You can totally see that in the suit. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Principal photography commenced in San Francisco in August of 2014. By the end of September, they filmed in Pinewood, Atlanta studios in Georgia. Kind of cool. There's a Pinewood over here. It's not the same, though, but
I would love to see it.
definitely.
But I think good old Pinewood Studios OG location is going to be top of the list.
There's no substitute for that. The State Archives building in Atlanta doubled as PIM Technology headquarters, which is set on Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay. It's pretty expensive real estate to put a company headquarters, right? Treasure Island? What is on Treasure Island?
Nuclear waste.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, it's for the longest time on Treasure Island, there was like a flea market, and you could go to the flea market and see a lot of the abandoned, decommissioned military housing that basically was just full of graffiti and broken down. And then, yeah, like actual like nuclear runoff from like testing in like the 50s.
You know how Trump wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico? I propose a more benign renaming of Treasure Island, because that's a bad name. There's no treasure there.
No.
Treasure Island makes it seem like a place you want to visit, and then when you like read about it, you're like, nah.
Nothing really cool about it.
No.
But maybe that's just like one of those things, right? Like, why call it Greenland?
You could go way back in history for that one. Filming was completed by December of 2014. It was around the same time that Kevin Feige announced Ant-Man would be part of Phase 2 rather than Phase 3. Visual effects were provided by ILM, Lola VXX, VFX, Double Negative, Luma Pictures, and Method Studios. Upon its release, the box office returns actually ended up surprising the studio. It made less than they expected in North America, where it made about $180 million. It did much better overseas, and it was particularly popular in China, where it grossed more than $100 million. That's our production history for Ant-Man. Let's talk why wasn't it better, Anton?
Woo.
Number one, as an MCU entry, and I actually forgot to mention this earlier, the other MCU film that I went into with zero knowledge was Guardians of the Galaxy. I knew nothing about the characters in that movie. I don't know how I forgot about that. I should have mentioned that earlier. So I'm mentioning it now. Ant-Man meant nothing to me when I first saw this on Netflix and hit play. I had popcorn. I had a soda, or probably an alcoholic beverage, if I'm being honest. And no knowledge whatsoever. I'm still not convinced Ant-Man needed his own movie. And I just want to say, I like this movie. I enjoyed this movie. But having seen it a couple times now, if someone told me that they wanted to skip it when they were watching all the MCU movies, I wouldn't argue in its favor. And I don't know why that is, because like I said, I enjoy it.
That's a really interesting point. And I think that it comes down to what is the library of the MCU now, and then certain films being of inconsequence, if that makes sense. It's really interesting to think about how successful this film was, despite a big leap of faith from the studio to even make a solo film for Ant-Man. And Guardians of the Galaxy is a really good example of another leap of faith for the studio. How do you build a cosmic superhero team or build out the powers cosmic to a fan base that really have no idea who that is? So it's, I know what you mean. Like, I think that I would list way more films before I recommend Ant-Man as like a Marvel film to watch. But I do think that it does stand on its own legs.
I mean, it can. That's the thing about it, right? You know what it's like? We both love Dragon Ball Z, right? You don't have to watch every episode. I kind of view it like that. If you do watch every episode, if you like Dragon Ball Z, you'll probably like it. Like, if you like the MCU, you'll like this movie. I like this movie. It's really funny. I really like the performances in it. There's some great chemistry with the cast. I like the set pieces. I think the visual effects are awesome. I'm saying all this like I'm about to end the episode and give my rating, but like I can't quite put my finger on it of why I think it's skippable.
Well, I think, to be fair, the template of the film is also probably a bit more, there's a bit of fatigue to it, because Ant-Man in actuality is, the structure of the film is very similar, like kind of from the get-go of, I don't know, name a number of superheroes, and even in the MCU, there's so many same story beats.
It's kind of the same plot as Iron Man in a
Yeah,
way.
in a way, Iron Man. I see some similarities to Doctor Strange. There's similarities, not as much to Thor. But at the end of the day, like I think because we know about like this hero's journey, it's always about like kind of the unique things and the unique flavors that make the film entertaining. And I do think that's where it shines, whether it's the dialogue, the way comedy is set up in the film does feel different from other Marvel films. And then when there is action, it does feel also a bit inspired in a different way. So I think in terms of how it feels compared to other Marvel films in that similar timeline, a bit different. Like, I feel like it is unique and obscure, but when it comes down to it, it isn't necessarily untreaded path.
I actually like it more as an action comedy than I do as an MCU movie.
Do you think it takes pressure off if this wasn't an MCU film? A film just randomly comes out called Ant-Man, which you find out at the very end is a sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
In a way, yeah.
Because there is an added pressure then, right?
Yeah, there is. You have to wonder at what point they told Edgar Wright you need to include one of the Avengers in this film. Like we know that they forced the Falcon cameo into this. And
Which
I'm not even complaining. I like
it was
that
fun.
scene.
It was really, really fun. Like you said, Edgar Wright probably for multiple reasons wasn't going to play along. And it's a bummer, but I do think we would have gotten a very different film. And even with what we have today with this current Ant-Man film, I still feel like you can see bits and pieces of the comedy of what was or what could have been.
Yeah, I mean, we're inevitably going to end up talking about Edgar Wright in a little bit. I find it interesting how they were doing the timing of some of these new character introductions too. Like, so they give Ant-Man his own film. He ends up appearing in Civil War, right? He has like a pretty, not a huge part in Civil War, but like a pretty good bit in it, right?
Yeah, like he's a probably, what is it? He's showing that he can do something other than shrink.
Right, and like crack jokes. The other part of Civil War I found interesting is that's where they introduce us to Black Panther and Spider-Man 3.0, right? They didn't give those two characters their own films until after their first appearance. Now, obviously, I understand the Spider-Man part of it because they had just gotten the access to that character legally after they reached a deal with Sony, and they were like, let's put him into Civil War. We can actually use him.
Yeah, and we understand why the Hulk hasn't gotten his own solo film.
Right, because every time they try it, they suck. But I wish Black Panther had gotten his own film before you see him in Civil War. Although he does have a pretty awesome character introduction in Civil War.
As much as like I love solo films for superheroes, I love it if it's so organic and well written to a story that you don't need a full film to introduce a character, because you know exactly who Black Panther is in that film.
Right.
In Civil War.
Right, exactly. They could have given Scott Lang the same treatment, in my opinion. I don't think he needed his own film. Now, again, I'm not complaining because I like this movie, and I'm going to give this a pretty good review. I like this movie.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is, did it need its own film? Did Ant-Man need its own entry as a solo film? And almost why give it its own film?
The actual plot of this movie is never really brought up again. The concept of the Pym particles getting used by some movie of the week villain named Darren Cross for nefarious purposes, that has no repercussions in any of the following films. The most important thing that gets featured in this film is, of course, the introduction of the microverse at the very, very end.
The quantum realm.
Right, that thing. Sorry, I don't know the terms like you do.
The microverse is what it was supposed to be.
Oh, is that right? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was like half right.
Which is really, really funny. Yeah, so it was supposed to be the microverse, but then, because that's what it was in the comics. But there's of course confusion, or at least like rights. I think like it's around like the legality of the microverse and micro machines. I think you know micro machines, right? The toy brand for small cars.
I mean, maybe. I don't think I do, but I believe you.
Yeah, but basically, yeah, there is just the legality around the microverse and just not wanting to kind of deal with any rights issues of using the term. That's why they use quantum realm.
Okay. So you agree with me, though? That is really the only thing of consequence that is shown in this movie.
Sets up Janet Van Dyne and
Right.
yeah,
Okay. That could have been a mid-credits scene in another film.
Hope Van Dyne. Yeah, I mean, no, I know what you're saying. I think Marvel will, or at least from a business standpoint, you can agree though. If it's an opportunity to make more toys and expand the franchise, why not?
Oh, that's the Disney way.
Yeah.
That's how
And
they're gonna finally greenlight my series proposal for Newt Gunray. What every Star Wars fan has been clamoring for since 1999, which is how did the Trade Federation become so powerful? I know that's what I want.
it's coming. It's coming,
I don't
folks.
care about the Mandalorian anymore. I want Newt.
Yeah, we want Newt. I think that when it comes down to it, comic book fans always love to see storylines and characters that we consider to be obscure deep cuts. And funny enough, like Ant-Man is a deep cut to your non-intense comic book fan, but is pretty important to the MCU. So being able to have Ant-Man back is a bit of it is something to be celebrated for already like existing Marvel fans before even the MCU came out. So I could see why with that established fan base it made sense. Now, they must have already written the ending for the Infinity War with the idea of the quantum realm being used as a plot device. In which case that also supports your idea of supports the idea of making your own Ant-Man film.
I wonder.
Because it didn't come out that long after this film.
Less than 4 years.
Yeah. So
they had to have been thinking about it by that point. How are we actually going to end this for, no pun intended? I would say as comic book origin stories go, though, I thought they handled this pretty well. They do a lot of pretty efficient storytelling with Scott Lang's character and Hank Pym. I mean, Hank Pym, we get 1989 intro with the de-aged
Michael Douglas.
Yeah, that would have been just prime Michael Douglas. He would have been married to Michelle Pfeiffer's character at that point, right? But do we have any reason to suspect that he wasn't horned up and nearly ruining his life?
No, maybe that was the real subplot as to why he lost access to all of his tech.
More on that later.
I think something I told you before the recording that makes me sometimes forget about this film, and not to say it's a forgettable film, but I just think about so many other Marvel films before I get back to Ant-Man, is, like you said, a lot of the storylines, even the stuff with Michael Douglas in the past with S.H.I.E.L.D., it just really doesn't get revisited again, or at least when it does get revisited, it's in very particular instances that just don't really show huge consequence to the future of the MCU. The biggest thing is the quantum realm, and it was a pretty big part, but at the end of the day, this film didn't really have that same, or at least it didn't really produce the same stakes and results as other MCU films did.
Yeah.
At least initial origin story films.
Yeah. No, you're right. Sounds like you agree with me.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Did you see the other superhero movie that came out in 2015? I'm not talking about Ultron. I know you've seen that.
Yeah.
Technically another Marvel movie, right? But not produced by Marvel Studios.
Now, in 2015, of course, we had, what was it?
Fantastic Four.
That's right.
Which was made by Fox, right?
Yeah.
And I've avoided that movie.
Michael B. Jordan.
Sounds like I made the right decision.
Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan.
Haven't heard anything good.
I did see it.
Was I right? Is it? I've never heard you talk about it, which says a lot.
You just don't need to watch it.
I won't.
The first Fantastic Four film was fun.
With Chris Evans?
Yeah.
Jessica Alba?
Yeah, Jessica Alba, Chris Evans.
You'd call that
his
fun?
Name?
His
what's his name from The Shield?
Oh yeah,
Michael Chiklis.
Yeah, and he dates blind Kerry Washington.
Yeah,
which is just it's outrageous.
How is that not fun? And like the way he still like goes into disguise as the Thing is he still just puts on a huge trench coat and a hat. Like that's gonna hide everything.
They're at the bar and she's like feeling his face. Oh man,
it's like which is directly from not only the comics but also that like classic film Mask
with Cher.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, it's 2015 Marvel films, Fantastic Four is not a good one.
And that's the perspective that I wanted to put this into, is like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm saying this film is a little bit skippable in terms of the Marvel lore, but it's like, I think having both of us reviewed Batman versus Superman recently, it made me appreciate just how good the Marvel movies are.
It's true. And for a film that we've talked about in length, like, is just a very no consequence, it stands up on its own as a very fun film that has
Yeah.
a very well introduced hero with very fun dialogue and also just great comedic timing throughout.
Well, let's talk about Paul Rudd and the cast then. That's our second reason, not region.
Paul Rudd.
I couldn't never see him in this kind of role. I think he does pretty good with it. He's funny. He's charming. He comes across as a nice guy because he is. Everybody likes Paul Rudd, right?
Yeah, which is why I think it was perfect to cast him, because when I think of the Scott Lang character, like, yeah, very same storyline from the comics. Like, ex-con just takes on the mantle of Ant-Man. And the way that it was written, it's like, it's so funny, right? He's an ex-con, but you see how he became friends with people in jail. He's just so relatable and funny, and it becomes more believable in that sense.
Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't initially see him as like a thief type, but then you pointed this out, that they distinctly, he refers to himself as as like a break-in artist, like not an actual thief, which is, I mean,
Right.
semantics, but
Right. He was a thief by circumstance, because he was using his intelligence to avenge people.
yeah, I mean, that's again, they never really ever follow up on that again, but
no, but at on the other side of it, it's there's never a believability that, like, he was actually like a dangerous felon, because of just already if you choose Paul Rudd as like your actor for anything, good luck trying to like not think of anything that he says is funny.
right. And they wisely put him in situations with the action stuff where he's never going to be believable doing Captain America type of brawling, but they put him in the suit and they have him be pretty creative with it, where he doesn't come across as like a kick-ass, muscle-bound type of hero. That's not his thing, and it would have been ridiculous to put him in those situations. They wisely don't. And I think they wrote the character, I mean, he obviously wrote, or he co-wrote the script too. That was a really intelligent decision on their part.
Yeah, and in terms of choreography, or even how does Ant-Man fight, I think that that's very well done to make it a bit more of a more creative outlook on how anything gets done when you're Ant-Man. That's just fun writing. It's fun to see on screen. It's easy when you're Iron Man, because it's like, oh, like, you want to fight a villain, build repulsor blasts on your arm so you can just laser the crap out of everyone.
Right.
But when you're Ant-Man, you have to shrink, you have to use your momentum, or you can shrink and get around, use your strength as you develop. It uses the physics of being the character, and then the believability that the character understands how to leverage that intelligence and strategize with his powers. So that's fun.
Rest of the cast. Evangeline Lilly, what do you think?
What's going on with her hair?
It's off-putting, and I realize as a bald man, I shouldn't be talking about a character's hair, but it's hard not to, because she has the same haircut as Johnny Depp in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I don't know what they were thinking. I got my wife to weigh in. She agreed. It's the first thing she said. She's like, what's going on with her hair?
When my wife and I were watching it, my immediate reaction was, why was she wearing that wig? And my wife agrees. So
I tried to find information on it, and there's a bunch of jokes you can find about it online, obviously. Like, we're hardly the first people to comment on this, but I was trying to figure out, like, was there like an accident or something? Like, what?
Is it an accident?
I don't know. It's
no, but it's so distracting.
It is.
It is so distracting, and like they completely course correct in the future films, but it's just so distracting to have her hair like that.
Her performance is fine.
I think that her chemistry with the main cast improves over the course of the films, but this wasn't the strongest performance.
Yeah, she's a little cold here. And I know part of that is down to how her character is written, how she's supposed to be interacting with her father. And now we can talk about her father, because I was most excited for Michael Douglas.
Big name to include in Marvel films, right? Or a big name to include in a Marvel film, but we shouldn't be too surprised. This is still in the same age of Marvel putting big names in their films as a bit of a draw.
Right. He was a good choice. This is a good role for him. I like him in the mentor role. He looked a little rough, but he had just recovered from cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, his cardigan game and his tie game is unimpeachable in this film.
Looking very good all film.
It's impeccable. Here's my question for you. Could this movie have been improved with a Michael Douglas has horned up and nearly ruined his life subplot?
I can only hope that is the deleted scenes for this film.
You could think of this as Disclosure 2.0. Like, what if Darren Cross had been a sultry femme fatale, and that's how Michael Douglas lost control of his company? He couldn't keep it in his pants, just like all those late 80s and early 90s movies that he was in. And by all of them, it's really like 4, but whatever.
But it's a genre.
It's a genre. We've talked about this before. We covered one of them. It's honestly one of our favorite subgenres. Michael Douglas is horned up and nearly ruins his life.
It's hilarious.
I don't think it's a coincidence that Basic Instinct is also a San Francisco movie.
Well, we just have to connect the dots and then maybe assume this is just a continuation of that story.
I like to imagine there's fictional deleted scenes where he's just like, Scott, you would not believe what this woman was capable of.
Ew.
I've seen what she can do, Scott. He's like, I'm telling you, the Pym particles had no effect on her libido. And believe me, I tried.
And Paul Rudd's just like, oh, gross.
I don't need to hear any of this, man. He's like, no, I gotta tell someone. I can't tell my daughter. And she's like, Dad, I'm right. I'm right here. I can hear everything you're saying. Like, Dad, that's my boss. That's my mentor. He's like, my God.
Mike. And he just keeps going.
Let me tell you something, Roxy. Oh, man.
It was the 90s.
Yeah. What was it? It was really like 3 movies, right? It was Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, and Disclosure. Could you throw A Perfect Murder in there? He wasn't really horned up in that movie.
No.
But what's his name was? Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah, Viggo Mortensen. Yeah, that probably sums it up, though.
Sort of. He doesn't almost ruin his life in Wall Street because he was horned up. No, that doesn't count.
No, that does not count. Not horned up in the game.
No, he's not. No.
He's a lot of other things in the game.
Right. Do we find this funnier than like most people? Because like I don't know. Because this whole subject is hilarious to me that he created this subgenre.
I think it's hilarious. I think Michael Douglas is one of the best actors of all time. And it's just so funny. Like, I love to see the range, and then I also love to see his impact on film, even if that includes this really fun subgenre.
Well, his impact on film is extended to producing, too, which is really cool. Because he produced your favorite movie, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, what a career. It is cool to see him in this role. It really is. Like I'm not kidding about this. He's one of my favorite things about the movie. I like his chemistry that he has with Scott Lang, or what's his name? Not Scott Lang. Paul Rudd.
Is that a bit of a compliment to Paul Rudd?
It is. Paul Rudd playing himself, which is I'm fine with. I like the line that he says to Scott when he's just like, oh, he's like, you need like 3 guys. He's like, oh no, not those wombats.
That is fun.
Great line. Speaking of the wombats,
you need my guys.
You need my guys. If Michael Pena had been nominated for an Academy Award for this movie, I would have been fine with it.
So funny.
He's great.
Love him in this film.
He's not just funny though. Like I want to give him a shout out. He's got real acting range because I've seen him do like dramatic roles, and I think he's equally good at those. The wine tasting party flashback that he tells, which is I guess is a bit like Drunk History.
Mm-hmm.
It really is one of the funniest things in the MCU. It's brilliant.
It's great. I think a lot of it comes down to how well written the dialogue is, in that I think everyone has that friend that just overshares when they tell a story. It's like don't tell that part of the story. Like, we have other things that we're focusing on. I
don't know who wrote which, but I would bet a lot of money that McKay wrote all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fantastic with dialogue and just how to weave it into the story of it being just a big long con by Michael Douglas.
Yes. Which somehow they pull off.
Yeah.
Because that could
Which
have
is,
been like
yeah.
really stupid and cheesy, and it's not.
Yeah, I think that when you come down to films that took the perfect circumstance for someone to take the bait and then go down the rabbit hole, I think this film did a good job of making it believable.
Yeah, believable within the context of this. I know what you mean, though.
Right? Like, oh, I knew that this would intrigue you.
Yeah, it does the same thing in a very different way. Like when I say like the movie Inception is believable, someone might be like, "What do you mean?" It's like, well, in the rules that it created for itself, it's believable.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what they do in these MCU films, like in all the way fast forward to Endgame when they're trying to explain the time travel and they're deliberately calling it out when they're like, no, it's not like Back to the Future. It's not like Terminator. It's more like this. And you're like, okay, they're actually addressing it up front. Now they've just made it believable to everybody watching.
Yeah, which is, I'd say, one of the best ways you're going to get some exposition in the film is if
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you're going to weaving it very naturally into the dialogue.
We say this probably on every other episode. There's nothing wrong with good exposition.
Exactly.
The rest of the crew's funny. T.I., your guy Dave Dalmatian.
Yeah.
I know that's not his real name.
101 David Dalmatians.
Yeah, he's very funny. All the bit parts in here are great. We get the perennially underused Judy Greer, who everyone's a fan of for good reason. She's awesome. She's one of the all-time greatest cartoon characters in Archer.
And one of the most hilarious secretaries of all time in Arrested Development.
And Kitty Sanchez.
You're never going to see these, Michael.
Yeah, she's been around a long time.
Yeah. And like you said, I don't think I've seen enough of her in film. So cool to see her in this one.
She always struck me as someone who has the talent to be a lead if she wanted to be in the right movie, but she just doesn't seem to do that.
I think there's a lot of actors that could probably go under that same category. I think it just sometimes it comes down to luck and then who your agent is.
Or what you want, too.
True that.
Not everyone wants that out of their career. That's an important thing to note with a lot of these actors. She's had a spectacular career.
Yeah.
But all the characters are well written, too. Like, even the guy that plays... Is he her husband? Or is it just her boyfriend, the cop?
I think it was the new husband.
The new husband? Okay. He very easily could have been a cliched asshole character, and they sort of subvert expectations where he actually ends up being like a nice guy. And it's kind of refreshing.
He could have been like the judge character from the Santa Claus.
A lesser film would have made him antagonistic, and he's not. Because everything he's saying to Scott, like early on, he's like, you can't just show up here like this. Like you're an ex-con. Like he's not wrong.
Yeah. I think that's probably a bit more of a modern, fresh writing take on those kinds of relationships. And
yeah.
I think that's also something about this film that's very unique in that you count any of the Marvel heroes, none of them are being written about like a ex-con, or even just none of it's really be written about someone that's divorced. So this is probably one of the most grounded characters that they've introduced across like solo Marvel films.
Yeah. He's not rich.
Nope. He's just really smart, but he's not rich. He's not a super scientist on paper. He is, but he doesn't have a lab. He doesn't have money. He's not a magician. Wizard.
And the actual rich mentor that we get in this film, which is Michael Douglas's character, Hank Pym, he does not have the resources that a Tony Stark or a Bruce Wayne has. Right. He lives in a really nice house, but he's locked out of his company. He doesn't have access to that stuff anymore.
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, as things build, as he gets more Ant-Manified, it's more believable and more enjoyable. Maybe that's it. Maybe we haven't really dug into that a bit more, that he is a bit more of a grounded hero when he's compared to the rest of the heroes that we've seen up to this point.
Grounded enough to work at Baskin-Robbins.
So funny.
Yeah, that's probably the funniest part.
Yeah.
When he gets fired.
Gosh, it's so good.
It's great. It's great stuff. It's perfect Paul Rudd. It's like this is just like the perfect use of Paul Rudd. Again, if someone had told you in 2005 Paul Rudd's going to be the lead in a superhero film, you wouldn't have believed them.
I would not have believed them. But I do think that the way that they wrote it used Paul Rudd's strengths like perfectly.
Next reason, the weak sauce villain. I like Corey Stoll as an actor. I think he's good. I really liked him in the first season of House of Cards. Pretty much everything I see him in, I like him in. He doesn't give a bad performance in this movie, but Darren Cross is about as dull of a villain as it gets for a superhero film, in my opinion. You just know he's a one-movie villain. You know what I mean? He's like Malekith from the Dark World. You're like, okay, just
He's
great.
every single, for the most part, a lot of Marvel films have that, where you have just the bad guy version of the main character. And this was no different. I think that at least with Darren Cross, there was a believability of corporate evil villain. And I think that just probably lends itself more to the acting.
Yeah, I mean they were also trying to, I think, write something into his performance where he's some kind of like unhinged psychopath, but they don't.
He doesn't really go there.
No, other than, I mean, killing the guy in the bathroom with the shrink gun is the coldest thing I've seen in the MCU. It is brutal.
Metaphorically, I've seen people do the equivalent working at different corporations. But I think that's where that's what I'm kind of coming down to, is that like even a more subdued, like crazy corporate guy, I think Stoll does a great job of having a very consistent performance of someone that you absolutely would hate in that situation. There's such a believability to the character.
Not a ton of subtlety, because just in case you weren't sure whether or not you were supposed to hate him, he kills a lamb.
Yeah, very hateable.
Very hateable. I want to go back to the shrink gun murder in the bathroom.
Yeah.
The red goop is still moving like a tiny bit after he does it. It's pretty dark for a Marvel movie. Really stuck with me. It's unsettling. It's genuinely unsettling. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I was like, wow. I don't know how I had forgotten about that scene, because now that I've rewatched it a couple times to prepare for this, it is one of the most memorable scenes in the film.
And as hard as I tried, there's been moments of blood in Marvel, but nothing ever this on the screen, like not gratuitous, but like it's very clear like what's happening, and it's also the implications are terrifying.
Yeah, and all the guy did was like oppose him. Was he on the board or something?
Yeah, just made him mad.
Right. Now here's a question. So I like Corey Stoll too. Would you have wanted to see Patrick Wilson in this role? Because I love Patrick Wilson. It's one of my favorite actors.
I think that they're both really great actors, and the only problem that I have with having Corey Stoll is just that then eventually they brought him back, and I don't know if you'd want to do that to Patrick Wilson.
I don't think Patrick Wilson would have participated in that.
That's very fair.
But he was the villain in that Aquaman movie, so he ended up doing this kind of role anyway.
Gotta get paid.
Gotta get paid. Here's a better idea for you, Anton. Corey Stoll is Lex Luthor. Who says no?
I think it'd have been great.
So in a multiverse setting, he's Lex Luthor instead of Jesse Eisenberg. That's a better movie than what we got in Batman versus Superman. And Patrick Wilson is Darren Cross. I guess you're still faced with the problem. He's just a corporate villain who wants to make money off of Pimtech, which is not very interesting.
Not very interesting. And they take a character, Yellow Jacket, who is actually one of the iterations of Ant-Man, make him a villain in the film, and then basically just say goodbye to him in one film. I've always had this not complaint, but just it's just not as fun as comic books for me, in that Marvel villains, for the most part, you just say bye to them after one film, versus comic books, you'll face them for 6 issues and then they come back for a different kind of, sometimes well written, sometimes not well written return. But for the most part, you're really only going to get these characters introduced once or twice for Marvel films.
And I get it. You're limited by the medium, right? You're just, how many times do we need to see the Joker in a movie? Apparently not enough.
But then I think that's why studios choose to pick someone like the Joker. It's like, okay, we only have one shot at this realistically, or we only have so many films we can make. Let's choose a character defining villains to be in the films.
Or more than one shot in the case of the Joker.
Yeah.
Give him his own movie. Give him his own streaming series.
But that's who they keep choosing, because they're like, well, we don't want to take a risk with anyone else. For a film that is a bit of a risk in itself, it could have been cooler to pick a different villain.
Who would you have wanted to see as the first Ant-Man villain on screen?
I mean, at the end of the day, like, it makes it such a more serious film if he's the one that creates Ultron. But that's a totally different storyline.
It wouldn't have worked in this MCU.
And it wouldn't have worked in this MCU. But it was one of the most compelling stories in comics and one of the character defining moments in comics. So I think that it would have been cool, but or at least like for example, Hank Pym was the one that created Ultron in the comics. If it was a return to Ultron, or if it was an introduction of Ultron, big reveal, the twist, it was Hank Pym that made him. Probably you could see it a mile coming if you're already a comic book fan, but probably would have been interesting if it's like Scott Lang's mentor is the one that created this monstrosity.
Any other villain that you would have wanted to see?
Big Wheel.
Sounds like a Transformer.
It's
Sounds like an Autobot.
it's a villain that he was a villain that probably fought Spider-Man more times, but he just kind of like is on a robotic wheel.
Sounds goofy.
Super goofy.
Okay. Although there's plenty of goofy stuff in this film.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into our thoughts on the production then, because that's the next reason. This is where we can talk about Edgar Wright. Is this the biggest missed opportunity in the MCU for you?
Right now the biggest missed opportunity was casting Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom, but this is probably a good close second.
So you would have loved to have seen an Edgar Wright Marvel movie.
Yeah, I would have. I mean,
we all would, right? Yeah.
I'm a big Edgar Wright fan, and like, you know, Marvel rules are one thing, but I feel like you give any fun director, give any director the chance to take their style and infuse it into a popular franchise or popular IP. I think that that's entertaining for any fan.
I say this with full respect to Peyton Reed. Like we mentioned earlier, he only had a year to get this done. I think he did the best job that he could given the circumstances. And the finished product ended up being, I think, a pretty good movie. So I think he deserves a ton of credit for what he did here. This is no slight on him. But yeah, I mean, if you could go back and have Edgar Wright direct this, yes, of course I'm going to pick that. And I think from what we know about the screenplay, Paul Rudd and Adam McKay, they did their best to honor Wright's original vision for this.
Yeah. And I think one of the clearest things, of course, is how well balanced the film is with the comedy of it all and with the story. Now, I really do think there would have been a bit more depth and nuance with Edgar Wright. Not to say that this film wasn't nuanced, but I just think that there's something particularly fun about the layers that you get in like an Edgar Wright film.
Yeah, for sure. I think this film's biggest strength is that at no point do I feel like the comedy ever clashes with the action.
Never too much, never distracting.
No, I mean, there's certainly some stuff that I can point out where I think there's plot contrivances with the action. But Wright's original vision for this film was, quote, an action adventure with some comedic elements that would incorporate both the Hank Pym and Scott Lang incarnations of the character, end quote. That's exactly what this film is. And here's what McKay had to say about it. Quote, I was really proud of what we did. I really thought we put some amazing stuff in there and build on an already strong script from Edgar Wright and sort of just enhance some stuff, end quote. And Paul Rudd said, quote, the idea, the trajectory, the goal, and the blueprint of it all is really Edgar and Joe Cornish. It's their story. We changed some scenes. We added new sequences. We changed some characters. We added new characters. If you took the two scripts and held them up together, they'd be very different, but the idea is all theirs, end quote. So you would say, given the circumstances, is this the best alternative that we could have hoped for?
I mean, it absolutely is. And I think that it's also amazing because usually when you think about things where a director's taking on a film, rewrites, a film is unfinished, someone gets put on, it could get a lot worse.
This could have gone disastrously wrong.
Yeah. But we ended up getting a very fun film with a lot of heart. So hey, let's go.
Where does this rank for you in terms of San Francisco movies?
Decent amount of San Francisco shots. Some of it I knew for sure wasn't in San Francisco, like the Treasure Island office. But I think it's cool. I don't know if I've wholeheartedly accepted Ant-Man as my San Francisco hero.
What are your other options?
The X-Men.
Really?
Yeah, there was an amount of time where there was a really interesting storyline where the X-Men moved to San Francisco.
You
And
can't claim all of them. It doesn't count.
it just totally worked. It was really fun in the comics.
That's upstate New York.
Yeah. They moved, man. They moved to San Francisco, and it was great.
And they moved back to avoid taxes. Just kidding. New York doesn't have low taxes. You could take Eric Bana's Hulk because he kind of wrecks part of San Francisco. You're like, nah, I don't want.
I know the Venom movies. I don't think we've ever talked about the Venom movies.
Never seen them.
The first Venom featured a lot of San Francisco, which was actually really cool. And in the comics, Venom did have San Francisco as his like place of operation during his solo run. So I think Venom would be a pretty cool character to claim.
Okay. So no on Ant-Man. You're passing on him.
It's not my favorite hero, but
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I should embrace Ant-Man as my MCU San Francisco representative. Not like we have many other choices.
I love Hank Pym's house. It's a pretty cool movie house. It is located next to Buena Vista Park, if you're curious to like where that actual location is.
Yeah, it's a nice area. Not too far away from like the Haight-Ashbury. It's like it's one of the parts of the city that actually consistently gets sun.
What do you think that would go for? Like $5 million, $6 million?
Yeah, if it's tucked away and it looks pretty tucked away, probably it's a multi-million dollar house.
It looks like a pretty private street.
Yeah, that's a multi-million dollar house.
My favorite part of the film, not actor related. The visuals in this movie are where I think it shines.
Mm-hmm.
Visual effects in here are really impressive to me. First of all, pretty good digital de-aging on Michael Douglas in the prologue. Doesn't look ridiculous. Doesn't look stuck in the uncanny valley like Jeff Bridges in Tron Legacy.
Patrick Stewart
in X-Men The Last Stand.
In The Last Stand.
That was the first attempt, and it doesn't look great now. I love the shrinking effect. The effects
really
team,
well done.
They said they were going for a stop motion effect. You can totally see it's really.
I think that like you're totally right. The visuals of this film do stand the test of time really well, and
holds up.
I think that's probably part of why it's still so. That's definitely a big part of why it's still enjoyable. Is that it's believable when the effects aren't so distractingly bad. You can believe it a bit more.
Like in the third one that you told me about.
That movie's disgusting.
Was that whole thing just filmed in front of a green screen?
Basically.
Yeah.
The characters look like they were designed by the same people that designed like the heroes from Incredibles 2.
Ugh.
Remember those?
In a live action movie? Yeah, that's not what you want. You know, I watched the trailer for it. Talking about the third Ant-Man movie.
Mm-hmm.
It looked every bit as ugly as do you remember the visuals in Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland?
Yeah.
Just like midway through the movie, you're like, does anyone have a barf bag? Like,
so I had it's really interesting. Friend of the show, frequent guest Ivan, I've had a conversation with him about this. At the time of the release, there was a lot of writer strikes and then production studios were booked. So that wasn't in the favor of the film.
The third one, you mean?
The third one. Now,
you can tell.
But at the end of but they still ended up releasing it. And
yeah, I think it's no excuse for a movie with that kind of budget and it's backed by Disney. No excuse why the effects shouldn't be good.
Yeah. And it suffers from also the sad direction of helmet removal in the MCU, which is you don't just take off a helmet anymore. There's no cool unlatching. There's no it just digitizes off now. I don't know if you've noticed that. And it's just lazy.
It rarely looks great.
Yeah, it just kind of looks like it just dissipates. There's just no weight to it.
Yeah, like even, Tony Stark's helmet, there was a mechanical element to it that looked real.
But by the time you go to Endgame, it's just nanobots. Yeah. But then everyone has nanobots?
Sure. Of course they do. I was stunned to read this was not nominated for Best Visual Effects at the Academy Awards.
Absolutely should have been.
Yeah, here's what was. So Ex Machina won. The other nominees were Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. You can take The Revenant right out of there and put this in.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy Ex Machina won.
Yeah, deserved.
This should have been nominated, though.
Definitely. It's not just that the effects in this movie look good. It's really original. A lot of what you see in this movie, I had never seen before.
Yeah, and it's
That's hard to do.
it is absolutely one of the cases where I have to just give the credit to Marvel and Disney for taking a risk on a very obscure character. They've done it before, or they've done it in recent history. Shang-Chi, another character that's like, that is a deep cut character. Like, if you were trying to find just a random character in Marvel history encyclopedia and you went through S's and you found Shang-Chi and you're like, I want to make a movie about it, good luck. And they made, what, $1 billion off of it? Yeah.
No.
Oh, was it not $1 billion film?
That was a
Maybe
COVID
not.
casualty. We'll never
But it
know.
was still really good.
Yeah, and that's ultimately why I have a lot of time for Ant-Man, is because they put a lot of thought into the visuals for this movie. Like, think about the first scene where he shrinks in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
On paper, that is a very simple, basic scene. And then he goes through a crack in the floor. He ends up on the turntable at that house party. It's just, that turned into like this. I had never seen anything like that. By 2015, it was almost impossible to do anything original with CGI, and they did it.
Yeah, and actually, we mentioned Honey, I Shrunk the Kids earlier in the episode. I think about the shrinking scenes in that night and day in terms of how you build someone small and how they interact with a larger world. It's really hard. And not only did they do that with Paul Rudd and this film, but they were creative in how he fights, in how he's disoriented even is really interesting.
They create rules,
yeah,
and they stick to them.
Yeah.
My favorite bit is when he smacks Yellow Jacket with the ping pong paddle into the bug zapper.
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
funny.
Doop. And then the ending on the train, the toy train, is pretty awesome, where it just falls over. It's pretty great.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. There is a pool, right, in that house in the fight scene.
Yes.
Not a ton of pools in San Francisco.
Good point.
Yeah.
Bet that costs a pretty penny.
So I was like, either that's a very specific house or that's just got to be a set.
I think it was a set.
Yeah.
Do you know anyone with a pool?
In San Francisco, no. In the suburbs, yeah.
Yeah, sure. In the suburbs,
yeah.
That is where I think the action it's very entertaining, but it does get pretty contrived in the final act. Like, Cross just going for his daughter it's every bad action movie cliche.
Like, it was, you knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, it's the action up until that point was so fun.
And you didn't need it to be there to build stakes for the character.
No, they could have had the same fight at the Pym factory. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think what it does story-wise, though, is it continues to push the importance of his daughter and family to just kind of into his overall character. But I just think at this point, it's just very, very cliche.
It is what it is. I mean, they had to emphasize he's a hero, right? He's a superhero. He has to save people. Oh, it's his family that he has to save. But it is very contrived. Like, all of a sudden the cops are just there.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe this is where, if this was an Edgar Wright film, I think of a lot of other Edgar Wright films that don't necessarily feel the same conventional way to display that same message, versus Disney probably was like, you got to have him save his kid.
Yeah, it did feel contrived to me. I mean, it's a nit to pick, I suppose.
Versus the end of Hot Fuzz, where it's just Simon Pegg's character taking out Timothy Dalton, and he's proving he's a hero by just taking out the town.
And then we get to the quantum realm. Pretty psychedelic.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Trippy's the right word. Again, they put a lot of thought into the visuals. It was clear they didn't just slap that together.
Yeah, and there's no way that they didn't plan to go back to this by the time they get to Endgame, even with like film releases.
And on the same token, I'm glad they didn't spend too much time in it. Because by that point in the movie, you had already reached the climax. You're like, please don't have an entire 10-minute sequence where he's stuck in here. And they didn't do that, thankfully. And it was the right way to handle it.
He can get smaller.
He can get smaller and smaller. What'd you think of the score?
I thought it was so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was Michael Giacchino. That's what it reminded me of. But it's by Christoph Beck.
Yeah. You could really sense the energy with this score. I especially love like the whimsical changes when we get to Michael Pena's stories.
Yeah, it's got a jazzy quality to it.
Oh yeah.
Anything to add about the production?
It's funny that a film that it's a superhero heist film ends up being the same character that sets up Endgame as a superhero heist film.
Yeah, pretty much. He's almost like the Dobby
The Tommy.
of the series.
I thought you were going to say Ocean. He's the Danny Ocean.
He's definitely not Danny Ocean.
No.
He's more of a Dobby than a Danny.
We got to put a team together.
Think we're going to need one more? Well, we can wrap this up, I think. I don't have anything else to add.
Let's do it. Let's wrap it up. Kebab or burrito?
Burrito.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Yeah, always. I think in the totality of the MCU, this film does not elevate itself into some kind of masterpiece. I don't think it's anything great apart from the visuals. It's a really fun popcorn movie, though. The performances are really fun. Paul Rudd, it was a risk, I think, for them to put him headlining this kind of movie, and it paid off. The set pieces are a lot of fun. What makes it work for me is just how fun and fresh it is. There's dozens of cookie cutter superhero movies at this point. And I think in that regard, Ant-Man manages to separate itself as something unique. But as part of the MCU, in terms of how this fits into the overall story, there's only one bit of it that really has any consequence. And I can understand why someone would feel the need to skip it. I do enjoy this movie, and despite the fact that I sort of agree with that. Like I said, I like it more as an action comedy than I do as like an MCU film. Looking back on it now, 10 years later, I think it was noteworthy, along with Guardians of the Galaxy, that MCU movies could tell smaller stories with quote unquote smaller characters and be successful. So I think for that reason, it's aged pretty well. I have this at a B minus.
So small character, big heart. No, I'm just kidding. But I really
put a heart of gold.
Yeah. It's the fact that we have such a grounded superhero heist film that really does make me appreciate this film a bit more. The more I thought about that comparison of other origin Marvel films for the larger MCU heroes that I think people think of more often, it's really interesting to get this very diverse character and to have someone like Paul Rudd that some people will say is one-dimensional, but I feel like this film really leverages his skills and his abilities to the fullest, and it made the movie so entertaining. The comedy is well balanced, it doesn't feel distracting, and the entire cast of characters really play off each other well, except for Evangeline Lilly's wig. That is to say, of course, again, I love the chemistry that we get with Michael Douglas and Paul Rudd. I feel like this is a really fun example of a very unconventional hero that is well written in terms of the creativity of what we see on screen, the choreography, the effects. And while there are things that are a bit more traditional or contrived, as you well put, Pat, there's still so many enjoyable things about the film that I definitely appreciate. I know that I appreciate it more with an analysis of the film. And before this episode, Ant-Man is definitely a film that I didn't think about more often, but I think that it does have to come up more in conversation because I would put this on more frequently than I would put on, say, Thor. So I'm going to go ahead and just say, for me, looking back on this and thinking about all those things, this film gets a B.
Well, that's it for Ant-Man. Yeah, that was fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Talking about shrinkage.
Shrinkage. Talking about, yeah, we talked about a lot of fun things. San Francisco, lack of pools in San Francisco.
Michael Douglas horned up.
Fatal Attraction, Disclosure.
Basic Instinct.
Yeah. Good times. Baskin Robbins.
Yeah. They always know. So I think next week's episode, movie-wise, is going to be Mission Impossible 2, because the new one's coming out, and neither of us are going to see that in theaters. So we just thought, let's cover the worst one in the franchise.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll be fun to talk about, and you know it.
Yeah. Let's do it.
But I think before then is our idea to rank the more films.
Yes, and that'll be a very good time.
Yeah. So the next episode you can expect to hear is going to be
More films.
a surprise.
Yes.
Something we haven't really done yet, right? It's a first.
Yeah, it's true.
We will say no more. But yeah, that's it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow and a 5-star review. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. There are various levels of subscription there if you are interested. And as always, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if anyone would like to support us directly, we have a Patreon. Links to all of the above are in the description. Thanks for listening and see you next time.